In this video, I'm going to talk to you about the different tools you might need to build new wheels and true them. So I'm going to go through things like spoke keys, wheel jigs, tension meters, dishing sticks, and a host of other things. I'm basically going to show you all the different types that I've got anyway. I'm going to show you how to make a tool that will make your wheel building much faster and therefore more productive. I'm going to show you ways to get around having the right tools if you haven't got them, but also so that you can speed things up in the workshop if you're just like, trying to true your wheel up quickly. Rather than having to take the wheel out of the bike, I'm going to show you how to true the wheel in the bike, give you some pro tips that make your wheel building better and easier to do. Let's start with some of the most common tools that you might use to build a wheel or to true them up.
The multi nipple spoke key. This one's got loads of different sizes on it. I wouldn't really recommend one of these. I mean, if you're really stuck, then yeah, sure. Multi-tool for not very many jobs. The main ones I use for normal nipples, black one for the smallest. Next one down, as if the black one's too tight, I'll use that one. And I often use this one to just get like the loose tension up when I just lace the wheel up, just to roll it on until they get too tight. And then I switch to the black one, because that's the right size. You should always use the one when it comes to like brass nipples, well, any nipples really, but the ones that fit the best. If it's a bit tight on it, that's good. If it's a bit loose, that's not so good. So, you've got to use your judgment for that. Then there's these ones here, which are just like internal ones. Yeah, this one's got 3 different sizes on it. This one you've got to go in from the top of the rim, and it's got like a, some sort of head on it. Got this one here, you can see there, it's got like a Torx head on it. And another one here, which is again, it's for different size heads. And then there's ones for like Mavics where they have the their own special shaped nipples, different size on the other end. And then another one, both of these are different again. And then we've got this one here, which is both a tool for holding that in there, holds a blade of a spoke if you've got bladed spokes so it doesn't twist. That's for the Shimano nipples that are down by the hub rather than by the rim. These come in different types, but they're all the same thing. See the slot there? That's slots to go over the bladed spoke so it doesn't twist, and you need to hold on to that while you're turning the nipples so they stay in line. And you can see it's got different sizes on there for different thicknesses. Little plain screwdriver to screw the nipples down from the top when they're really loose, just to get them down to the thread or something like that. Some matches. I like to just get that. This is for when I'm building wheels or trying to get a nipple in there. You can just get a nipple and screw it into the end like that. That's to put an electric drill so that you can screw the nipples down and it just pops out when they're all down to the same position. They cut down valve caps, just put them on my wheel jig sometimes when I'm doing disc wheels. Oil, it's a well-known viscous oil. I use this to oil the nipples, and you see this little straw here, that's actually a gear cable ferrule inside the cap with the little hose. It allows me to put a little loads smaller drips on. What this is really good for as well is for oiling brake pivots and also oiling front and rear derailleur pivots. Oh, and jockey wheels as well. Washing up liquid. I use this on wheels that like, the CD wheels where the rim's grey or something like that, where the oil might stain the rim and you'll never get it out. But it's just a really good quality washing up liquid. Spoke ruler.
Some other things you might need: a wheel jig, a tension tool, a dishing stick. Other things that help you build wheels and true them up. They might not be completely obvious tools, but they are. Things like a spoke calculator, whether that be a manual one or one that you use online. A spoke diary, so you can keep track of the different rim and hub combinations that you use. You've got something to go back to and when you've put some spoke calculations into an online spoke calculator, or you've done your own measurements. Okay, so there are different ways that you can work out the length of the spokes that you need. You can measure it all up yourself. I think DT and other companies do a chart where you can actually put the rim and the hub and stuff up against a chart and get your measurements off it like that. You can manually measure them with tape measures, vernier gauges, etc. And you can find the information online on how to do that. And you can use online spoke calculators as well. They're not really always as accurate as you'd otherwise want them to be. And for that reason, you should always keep a spoke diary of all the wheels that you built previously, so you can compare different combinations of hubs and rims to what you get out of other spoke calculations, whether they be online or manual. And this allows you to work out the difference. If you use an online spoke calculator, they're often 2 mil out one way or the other, but it's usually like one way rather than the other. But by comparing that to the rims and the hubs that I've used before, I can tell how far out they're going to be. So I can make a pretty accurate decision about what the right spoke length is. Sometimes you're in a situation where you're not going to have the tools available that you need, like a wheel jig or a dishing tool, tension meter. There's quite a few things that you can do without and use something else to sort it out. So when you're building bikes in a shop, or you just want to straighten your wheel up yourself at home, you can just do that generally in the bike. Now if you've got a caliper brake or V-brakes, you can just use the brake pads. There'll always be somewhere in the stand where you can change the angle of the bike and or the angle of your head so that you can see a gap between the brake block and the rim. You can also feel when the wheel actually stops, you can see where it stops, so you can actually measure the amount of spokes that you need to adjust to take the buckle out and straighten your wheel up or to get it round. If you've got a bike that hasn't got any type of rim brake, it's a disc brake bike or a single speed or something like that, you can do something like use other things to check whether it's straight. You can use zip ties if you put them onto the seat stays, and you can just move the zip tie closer and further away as you get the wheel straighter. You can also use a zip tie across the top of the rim so you can check the roundness. I use a brake block or I use a zip tie in the same place on the side just to see if it's round. It's not actually that hard to do, and it's a really good skill to learn. Now a zip tie might not work for everyone. There are other things I use. I don't often use zip ties myself. I use something like a pencil, a tyre lever, or my thumbnail. You've got to just find out what works for you and use that to straighten up your wheels when they're in the bike. The addition tool is a tool that's used to measure whether the rim is over the centre of the two ends of the axles. So in a front wheel, that's going to put it over the centre of the flanges as well, unless it's got some sort of dish for a rotor. But on a rear wheel, that pushes it right across to make room for any dishings that's required for a freewheel or a cassette or something like that. But basically what you're trying to do is get the rim into the middle of the frame on the rear or the middle of the forks on the front. The way to use a dishing tool is to undo the little feeler on the middle, which would touch against the axle end, and then you slide down the feeler until it reaches the end of the axle, or the axle nut, which is going to be touching the inside of the frame. And then you set that there, and then you turn the wheel over. If there's a gap between the feeler and the axle end, then the hub needs to lift up towards that, or the rim needs to go away from that. So basically what that means, if the hub needs to pull up towards it, you need to loosen the rim off on that side so it drops closer to the hub, or you need to tighten the other side to pull it back across. If, however, you put it on there and the feeler actually touches the end of the axle nut and then it doesn't actually touch the rim itself, then the rim needs to come closer to that axle nut. So you need to tighten that side up. One thing to remember when you're trying to dish a wheel is the amount of distance between the feeler and the end of the axle, or the rim and the two end points on the actual dishing tool, only needs to be halved. So say you've got a gap of like 1 centimetre. To get that in the right place, you only need to reduce that by half a centimetre, because you're taking it across half a centimetre, which is going to gain you half a centimetre on the other side, which makes a whole centimetre.
Right, no dishing stick? No problem. You can measure either side here, like that, with a vernier caliper, the back end of it or something like that. But the really easy thing to do is just put your fingers in there, find two fingers that fit in about the same, because they're not that different on each hand, and you can feel as well when you do that. It's not just visual. Yeah, I mean, that's good practice anyway. I do that just to see there's a bit of a gap there with that finger. I can move it quite easily. That one's pretty much perfect for this particular one. But this is a good habit. I do this to make sure the wheel's in the middle when I put it in the bike, especially if you've got like rim brakes, if you set the brake up properly.
So when it comes to bike tools, especially wheel tools, you should always use the best tools you can afford, or the tools that you're comfortable using. I could have a really expensive park jig or something similar, where in theory dishes the wheel for you as you go with micrometers on it and all sorts of business. However, I've never really been happy using those sort of jigs. I use my old jig that I've had since I was a teenager, and it's really good because it's straightforward and I can feel vibrations going through it. I can hear the rim hit the feeler gauges as it's going around. For me, that's the best way to do it, to use the tools that you're comfortable with. The other thing that's important, if they do wear out, replace them. Now we're going to talk about oiling the nipples. Right, this might sound a little bit rude, but it's good to oil your nipples. There are two reasons why you should use oil on your nipples, and sometimes washing up liquid, which I use if I have a rim which is light in colour and the oil might seep into the metal and stain it, which you can never get out. The first thing is putting oil between the nipple seat and the actual rim itself, or the eyelet, or the washers if you're using washers. What'll happen is if you don't oil them, they'll start to bind into the actual rim or the eyelet, and it'll start to burr the nipple, and it'll just dig in, and you'll end up rounding your nipples before you've got them up to tension. Now I also put a little drop down on the thread from the top, and what this does is it lubricates the thread, so again that the threads aren't binding to each other as you're tightening up the spoke, which allows you to get the spoke tighter and up to tension again, without ruining the nipples. So something I always do when I finish building a wheel is to spin the oil out of it. So I basically get the wheel on my shoulder and I just throw it forward so it spins out, and the force from it spinning just makes the excess oil come flying out. And if you don't do that, what might end up happening is the oil, after the wheel's been ridden, gets into the rim tape, and then it can just then seep through to the tube, and you end up with punctured tubes just because the oil's actually deteriorated the rubber. Don't do this where you don't want oil splattered. So basically, if you've got a workshop, you don't care where the oil flies, that's fine. If you're doing it in your lounge, you don't want it on your carpet or your TV, then just take it outside and do it. And the other important thing is either wear safety goggles and or spin it so that the wheel's not spinning in line with your eyes. Some people like to use some sort of glue on their nipple threads. They like spoke freeze, or they use nipples that have actually got like some sort of Loctite in them that stops them undoing when the wheel's being used after you've built it. I rarely do it because by oiling the nipples, I'm getting the tension up higher than I would do if I didn't use that. So I don't really need to, because the tension of the spoke is enough to keep it from undoing. One of the fundamental parts of building a wheel is getting the tension right. You can use a spoke meter for that, a tension meter, which measures the deflection of a spoke, and then that basically determines how tight it is. The less it deflects, the tighter it is. But you've got to get yourself to a point where you don't really use a spoke meter. I hardly ever use one. The only time I ever really use one is when there's a maximum tension that can be put on the rim. This is something that comes with experience, but you need to learn how to do it, because it'll save you time, and also if you can't afford to buy a spoke meter, or you don't need one because you're not building wheels all the time, then you need to know how to do it yourself. So let me show you the different types of deflection in a wheel, i.e. the front wheel, what that's like, what it's like on the drive side, and what it's like on the non-drive side. What a tension meter does is it measures the deflection of a spoke, so how much it actually will bend, determined by how tight it is. So on a non-drive side, or a non-dish side of a wheel, if it's a wheel with a disc rotor on it, the deflection is quite a lot. If you have a look, see how much is there? Now if that was a front wheel, that would be too soft, and clearly it would be too soft for a drive side of a wheel. So on the drive side of the rear wheel, it's actually quite tight, but the spokes still have to deflect, otherwise the wheel will be so rigid that the spokes get to a point where they just snap, or the wheel will be too stiff to actually ride and be very nice to ride. There'll be no actual comfort or shock absorbing in the wheel. So you just want it to deflect a little bit like that. If it doesn't really move, it's too tight. Now a traditional front wheel, which doesn't have any dishing in it for a rotor or something like that, you can see because the wheel doesn't need to be as tight, they actually deflect more to have it at a good tension for a front wheel. You don't want the front wheel too tight, because if it is, it'll give you trouble cornering, and also it won't take the shocks out of the road as well as it otherwise would do. Just a good amount of movement like that.
Right, I'm just going to show you the problem with using the wrong size spoke key. So this is the right size spoke key. This is the smallest one that Park make. Other manufacturers make spoke keys that are good as well. And this fits on it just moves a tiny little bit on the nipple. So if we start tightening that up, you can hear that needs some oil as well, but we can still do that. What's that? 2 turns on that with the right side one. So let's undo it again, and let's put the next size down one on, which is the red one, on the same one, and let's see what happens. Just tighten it up. Oh look, it's already started to go. We're just nipples rounded. That's it. Nipples wrapped. Going to take you a really hard time and a while to get that out, and you could have just stopped that by using some oil on the nipple seat, and also using the right size spoke key.
The one that hasn't been wrapped, you can see it's still got fairly square and flat edges.
One of the most important parts about building wheels, and also truing them, is getting even tension. And so when you're building a wheel, you need a good starting point, and the best starting point, once you've laced it all up, is to get the nipples down to the threads, where the thread ends on the nipple, and start from there by adding the same amount of tension, a turn or 2 turns or whatever it is, and then it'll all come up at the same tension. You can use a little screwdriver in the top of the nipple, where the slot is, and screw that down. Just do it by eye. I use my fingernail sometimes just to catch the edge so I can see if I've gone far enough. You can buy tools which are manual tools. I use a drill bit, a plain screwdriver drill bit, and I grind the edges off there on the bench grinder. So I put in the drill and screw them down as I go around, And what actually happens is as the thread comes up, as the spoke thread comes up through the nipple, it gets to a certain point and it just pushes the tool out. Now it doesn't really matter if that goes to like a quarter of a turn or half a turn past where the nipple thread ends, as long as that happens on all the spokes. So I'm going to show you how to make that tool. I've got one for 12mm nipples, I've got another one for 14mm nipples, but I've never had one for 16mm nipples. The reason is, it looked like it was going to be quite a pain to make it because it needs quite a long shank on it, and the driver bits I had weren't really like that. But as we're making this pro tip video, let's go ahead and do it. Something I've done for a long time to reduce the amount of spokes I have to hold is to have different length nipples. So you get 12, 14 or 16mm nipples. This means you don't have to have as many spokes because you can use a different length because you're using a different length nipple. So something that might, you might need a 298 for example, you've only got 296s. Instead of using a 12mm nipple, you can use a 14mm nipple. It saves you money, you've got more options to build wheels, and also if you can't get hold of the spoke, you've already got some sort of solution there to sort it all out. I've always also got a couple of different types of washers to put under the nipple seat. I use these for two different things. One, I use them to strengthen the wheel, so if the wheel's not eyeletted, I use the washer to spread the load so that it's not just putting on the actual hole in the rim where the nipple goes through. But the other thing I use them for is I use them to adjust spoke length. So sometimes you can't even buy the right spoke length, so you can't buy an odd number, if you've got say a 1mm difference for a rear wheel or for a dish wheel which has got a disc brake on it. So what I do is I use the 1mm thick washers to change the spoke length. So let's say I'm doing a 298 and I've got 300 but really I need 299. Under the 300 nipples I'll put a washer that basically makes that spoke shorter and a 299 rather than a 300. Okay, a little bit of housekeeping for you. Always keep your spokes in order. And what I mean by that is never mix them up, never take them out of one box and put them into another, never let anyone else touch your spokes and put them into another box. If you take a spoke out of a box and you don't know what size it is or you can't remember what size it is, don't muck about, throw it away, because it'll cause you so much anxiety and trouble later on when you've got one spoke in a wheel that's the wrong length. Down in the description, there's some links to other resources for wheel building and wheel truing that might be helpful. I just want to say thank you to the people that have put these up online so that I can share them with you. So that's the end of this video about wheel building tools and wheel truing tools, what you need, how you can get around using some of those tools if you haven't got them for whatever reason that is at the time. Please stay tuned if you want to see more top wheel building pro tips, because I'm going to be dropping some more videos real soon. And if you like this video, subscribe, hit the thumbs up, and leave any comments that you want to leave down below. Don't forget, wheels aren't just for building, wheels are for life, if they're made properly anyway. So get out there and ride them.